Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Katrina Kosec, and I am a Senior Research Fellow at IFPRI, Interim Deputy Director of CGIAR's Food Frontiers and Security Science Program, and lead for our area of work on fragile and conflict-affected food systems. We really appreciate you being with us today for this really important discussion, worsening food insecurity, waning response capacity, options for a better way forward. This event is co-organized by IFPRI, the Food Security Information Network, and the CGIAR Science Program on Food Frontiers and Security. It's also part of an exciting new IFPRI policy seminar series we're just launching called Fragility to Stability, and we really hope you'll join us for future seminars under this theme. This topic is really timely because of what we all know is an ongoing and sharp rise in conflict, displacement, climate shocks, and also simultaneously the erosion of funding and capacity to respond effectively. At IFPRI and through the CGIAR's Food Frontiers and Security Science program, these trends are core to our work. We're meeting these challenges head on in places like Sudan, Somalia, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Mali, where food crises are layered on top of other vulnerabilities. Our work spans all three phases of crisis. We're aiming to prevent and anticipate shocks through risk reduction and early warning systems and providing evidence on those. We support efforts to respond in real time with effective and evidence-based policies and programming. And we also are working on programming to help and support communities to recover through research that promotes long-term resilience and sustainable livelihoods, even in the most difficult and fragile environments. Today's event will draw our critical insights from the Food Security Information Network's 2025 Global Report on Food Crises, as well as present really exciting, cutting-edge related work from IFPRI researchers and partners. To open today's event, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Johan Swinnen, Director General of IFPRI. Yo is a globally recognized expert in agriculture and food policy. He has extensive work on trade, political economy, institutional reform, and food systems transformation. Yo, over to you.
Thanks very much, Katrina. I hope you can hear me. I'm actually in Sevilla at the Finance for Development event, the four-day event organized by the United Nations, which is obviously extremely timely, also very relevant, I think, for the issues we will be discussing today. Welcome to everybody for joining us here today. This is, as Katrina already noted and said, a very timely event, and in a way a bit timely for not so good reasons. We've seen a rise in acute food insecurity globally, which we haven't seen in a long time. It is just the numbers that will be presented today are just showing that this trend of increasing food insecurity, food crisis situation is continuing. For the latest data that we have that will be presented today. And so we are facing a major global crisis. I mean, we're facing a combination of global crisis of systems, of capacity, political will also. And of course, what Katrina already said, it's reflected in conflict and displacement, and how it interacts with climate volatility, economic instability, and underinvestment in a number of ways, which are weakening both our capacity to deal with it and also our response. And even the fact that some of these things are happening as a result of our lack of the right investments that we have done or not done in the past years. The challenges that are faced are particularly acute in fragile and conflict-affected settings. That's what we will be talking about today. And as Katrina already mentioned as well, the scale of the challenges is growing, but at the same time, our ability to respond is really under attack, I would even say. It's being stretched thin at this moment. So this creates leads to a whole set of questions, a set of issues of how to deal with these challenges, but also to ask whether there are opportunities in the current situation that we can use to come up with new answers and maybe better answers than we've been able to give in the past decade. The 2025 Global Report on Food Crisis, and we will hear more in details on it, is clear, as I already mentioned. So the number of people facing severe levels of food insecurity has tripled since 2016. This is really unprecedented. I mean, it's a huge reversal of a trend, which was actually quite good between, let's say, the 1970s and 2010. We are now looking at almost 300 million people in food crisis. So this is a huge number, and it just keeps increasing from year to year. So the report points out several basically indicators of what's going on, but also relates it to things like conflict, shrinking humanitarian budgets, gap in early warning systems, and they are creating something like a perfect storm. Okay, so one in which the risks and the needs are growing while the response capacity is weakening. At IFPRI and at the CGIAR more broadly, this is central to our work on reducing hunger, improving nutrition in the world. And so we're pleased to be part of the team or the group which is producing this report. It helps us, these indicators helps us target our research, it understand the emerging risks, and also to stay grounded in the realities faced by vulnerable populations. So we rely on it, and we're also very proud to collaborate with FSIN and other partners in generating the kind of evidence that can inform us and that can improve responses. Katrina also referred to the new science program, the CGIAR science program of Food Frontiers and Security. It's a very important program which is really targeting very strongly the issues we will discuss today, using science and analysis in order to provide both insights and help us to come up with solutions. We also try to do that in a way that is not just academically relevant, I would say, in terms of rigorous research, but also to make sure that what we find is usable, timely, relevant for policymakers and anybody involved who needs to make decisions in making the situation better. Partnerships are really important for us. Partnerships with humanitarian actors, with national, regional governments, civil society, and obviously also other research organizations. And they're vital for us to build collaboration which allows us to do better research, better analysis, but also to then feed the results of our analysis into closely and into the way people can use it, in the format people can use it. Our teams are on the ground in many of these places. It's very difficult work. It's not easy, but it is essential in various places in the world. Katrina also referred to a number of places. And this is to inform policies, to support action, and to fill critical data gaps. And for that also, we try to use the most innovative tools and methodologies and technologies that are available in helping to come up with the best data and the best early warning systems that can then feed into actions going forward. So the seminar today is very much helping us confront the reality of the challenges, but also hopefully to point towards potential solutions to the challenges. And so some of the questions which will come up today, I think, so what's the consequences of the reduced aid budgets around the world? And should we consider new modalities of providing humanitarian and development assistance, particularly in this fragile context, which are potentially less sensitive to fluctuations in donor budgets? And also another question is, can we anticipate these crises better, using better data, better ways of working on it, better methodologies, better technologies, etc. as well? Okay, and so the idea is really that we can anticipate better rather than having to respond to the crisis when they occur. So let me just end by thanking all of you who are part of this effort, also everybody who is on the call today, in the audience today, for your comments, your contributions, and your partnerships with us. And I hope that today's conversation opportunity to reflect, to learn from one another, and also to strengthen our evidence base that we need to have in order to identify the best policy responses or action responses more generally. Thank you again, and I look forward to the discussion ahead. And back to you, Katrina.
Thank you, Yo, for that really powerful framing. We're now going to turn to our panel of experts, and they bring a really exciting, a wide range of perspectives together. These range from global coordination efforts and donor policy to frontline experiences in crisis-affected countries. We even look at analytical tools that can help us anticipate and better respond to food insecurity. Um, each speaker will provide brief remarks, and then we're going to move into a discussion and audience Q&A session. Throughout the seminar, this is a message to our audience. Please, we welcome you to submit questions via ifpri.org, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, or by using the hashtag AskIFPRI on X. Please type your questions and remember to include your name, affiliation, and country where possible. To begin, I'm really pleased and excited to introduce Sara McHattie. She is the Global Coordinator of the Food Security Information Network. FSIN brings together 16 partner organizations and publishes the Global Report on Food Crises, which has become a critical reference since it was launched nearly a decade ago. Sara, I welcome you to share your perspectives on why food insecurity is rising, what we should expect in the near future, and where we're going. Thank you so much.
Hi, apologies for that. I'm just doing some IT, managing some IT here. Okay, great. I'm just going to share my screen, and please give me a heads up when you can see it.
We can see the slides and just enter full screen mode. Yep, perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful, great. So thank you so much for joining us online. And I'm really happy to be presenting to you today some of the findings and trends from the GRFC 2025. First, I want to introduce you to the report very quickly. It's a report that's produced in partnership with 15 technical UN agencies and regional government organizations. We follow a rigorously developed methodology to identify where there are food and nutrition crises, who and how many people are affected, and also why. And we provide a consensus-based and evidence-driven analysis on acute food insecurity and acute malnutrition at the global, regional, and country levels. In doing so, we serve as a trusted common reference point for decision makers, policymakers, advocates, and academics. As we know, food crises and nutrition crises are dynamic, and even when they're protracted, they can change and evolve rapidly. As such, we analyze the highest recorded number of people facing acute food insecurity each year. Effectively, we take an annual snapshot of what is, as we've heard, a moving crisis. In doing so, we have a database of consensus-based numbers that covers 9 years of data, and we're able to take into account countries that move in and out of food crisis and also that move in and out of data availability. And as such, we're able to build a comparable trend analysis for food crisis and what drives them since 2016. Today, I'll present to you the data and evidence on people who faced high levels of acute food insecurity in 2024, as well as the key trends that we've been observing since 2016. So in 2024, we identified 65 countries with food crises. Only 53 of them had data that met our technical criteria. 12 of them were data gaps and aren't included in the subsequent analysis. You can see those countries in darker gray on the map. 295.3 million people were in need of assistance. This is almost 14 million more people than in 2023, attributed both to increasing analysis coverage, but also because we saw deteriorations in many countries outweighed improvements in others. The darker colors on this map show those countries that had the highest numbers of people in urgent need of assistance. And when we speak of acute food insecurity, it's also important to speak about the share of the population in a country that is affected. And in doing so, we can capture those countries that have smaller populations, but that also face food crises. In 2024, 22.6% of the analyzed population were in urgent need of assistance. This means more than 1 in 5 people that were assessed. And using this metric of share, you can see here in darker colors a different set of food crises emerging. Palestine, again, had 100% of its population in need. And Sudan, South Sudan, Yemen, and Haiti each had close to half of their populations facing high levels of acute food insecurity. The dots on the map here show displaced populations. The darkest dots show where over half of those who were displaced were in need of assistance. In this 9th year of publication, we're able to provide a trend analysis since 2016. In this graph here, the dark beige bar represents the total population of the countries that we've analyzed in the GRFC each year. The yellow bar is the analyzed population. This has varied year to year, but we can see that it's increased from under 1 billion people analyzed in 2016 to almost 1.4 billion in 2025. The orange bar is the number of people in need of food assistance. We can see that 2024 is the 6th consecutive increase, and the number has almost tripled since 2016. Each year, 35 protracted food crises account for 80 to 90% of this figure of people in need. We can also see in this graph that since 2024 is the 5th year where we have over 20% of the population in need of assistance. So this means that since COVID, 1 in 5 people assessed are in need. I wanted to draw your attention as well to some of the trends that we see in the severity of food insecurity, looking specifically at the most extreme form of insecurity to the least extreme form. When we look at IPCCH phase 5, the most extreme form where populations face starvation and destitution, we see in 2024 that almost 2 million people were in this phase. Since 2016, we see that the numbers have increased dramatically. And since 2021 as well, the number of countries we see that more countries are affected. But even so, since 2021, these high figures tend to be concentrated in just 1 or 2 countries. In 2024, 95% of the population facing phase 5 were in the Gaza Strip and Sudan, where famine was also identified. In 2023, most of them were in Gaza Strip, 2022, mostly in Somalia, and 2021, mostly in Ethiopia and in South Sudan. And then moving to phase 2, populations that face stress, while they're not in need of urgent life-saving assistance, they're still considered acutely food insecure and highly vulnerable to shocks. Since 2016, we've seen the number of people facing stress, quadruple to almost 345 million people. And what is even more alarming here is that we've also seen the share of the analyzed population in this phase increase at the same time as the share in phase 1, or minimal food insecurity, decrease. This signifies deteriorating acute food insecurity overall. What's driving this food insecurity? The drivers of food insecurity are interlinked, they're mutually reinforcing, and superimposed on structural vulnerabilities. The GRFC identifies the primary driver for food crisis in each country, and the associated number in this graph is the number of people in those countries that are in need of assistance. In 2024, the primary driver of acute food insecurity continued to be conflict for 20 countries. Conflict is on the rise and has been for some time. This affects not only the ability of households and communities to maintain their livelihoods, but it also affects the ability of humanitarian actors to conduct life-saving operations. Weather extremes were the primary driver in 18 countries. In 2025, we're again on track to be one of the hottest years on record, further disrupting climate patterns. In 2024, 15 countries had economic shocks as their main driver. While this is less than in 2023, it still remains twice as high as pre-COVID years. And 2025 is again shaping up to be another year of major economic shocks due to imposition and posturing around tariffs, disrupted supply chains, and inflation rates are expected to remain high in many countries. In this edition, we've also conducted an analysis of the trends of the primary driver for the 35 protracted food crises for which we have data each year. The darker boxes indicate conflict, where conflict is the major driver, the medium green ones where economic shocks are the major driver, and the pale teal weather extremes. The dots represent where there are only displaced populations analyzed. What we see is that in most countries, the primary drivers change and have changed. We also see that only 8 countries have been affected by the same primary driver for the last 9 years. 7 of them has been conflict, still the major driver of acute food insecurity. The exception to the rule is southern Madagascar, where weather extremes have been the main driver for the last 9 years. You can also see in this graph how economic shocks dominate in 2020 and 2021, supplanting conflict and weather extremes for many countries. And these variabilities and drivers really underscores the challenges for us as the international community to both respond to shocks, but also to build resilience over time, because we have to build resilience to so many different shocks. For the first time, the GRFC introduces a definition for nutrition crisis, and we're able to highlight where there are high levels of acute malnutrition among women and pregnant and among children and pregnant and breastfeeding women. 26 countries had nutrition crises. The darker colors on the map show the most severe: Gaza Strip, Mali, Sudan, and Yemen. In 2024, there are almost 38 million acutely malnourished children, more than 10 million of whom face the most severe and life-threatening form. This was a sharp deterioration in the four most severe crises since 2023, and the outlook does not show for improvement. Displacement is both a driver and an outcome of acute food insecurity. Most displaced people are in countries with food crises, and here we can see again a rising trend since 2013, most often driven by conflict. In 2024, we've counted 95.8 million forcibly displaced people in countries with food crises. Half of them were in just 4 countries: Sudan, Syria, Colombia, and DRC, and 3/4 of them are internally displaced. In the 15 countries where we have data on both displaced populations as well as residents, the evidence shows that shows higher severity of acute food insecurity among the displaced than host populations. And just to conclude here on the funding outlook, I've just presented how the numbers of people in need of food assistance have almost tripled since 2016, and how drivers continue to worsen, and in doing so, erode country, community, and household capacities to cope. What we see is that between 2016 and 2024, even though there was an overall increasing trend in funding allocations to the humanitarian food sector, with a distinct peak during COVID, we know that it did not keep pace with the needs. And in 2025, the abrupt termination of funding led to the closure and disruption of operations in some of the world's worst food crises. And now, despite an increasing intensity of drivers and increasing need, funding is projected to drop to 45%, by up to 45%, affecting life-saving food, nutrition, health, and livelihood support. This risks increasing the severity of food crises, but it also risks decreasing our capacity to monitor and assess food insecurity and malnutrition where they are, and to make evidence-based decisions and policies. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation.
Thank you to Sara McHattie for those very interesting remarks, and my major congratulations on a really powerful report. I'm really struck by how you've highlighted the roles of conflict and insecurity as the major driver of food insecurity in many country contexts, supplanting economic shocks or weather extremes. And also appreciate the introduction of nutrition crises. That seems like a very, excuse me, critical methodological pivot towards kind of drawing increasing attention to nutrition amid crises. Next, we're very pleased to hear from Simona Bortolotti, Policy Officer in the European Union's Directorate General for International Partnerships, where she's focused on informing policy responses to food crises in the Sustainable Agri-Food Systems and Fisheries Unit. Simona, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Today my intervention will focus on the issue of budget cuts with regards to both humanitarian and development assistance, which is a matter that comes, let's say, in a very interesting time, considering the latest news and current events on the subject. As we speak, And as it was also highlighted by IFPRI in their introductory remarks, Spain is hosting the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, which is highlighting the urgent challenges in financing for the SDGs, including a US dollars 4 trillion annual gap, unsustainable debt burdens, declining aid, and limited engagement from the private sector. Just yesterday, the United States Secretary of State announced that the State Department will take over foreign aid. So as of yesterday, as of July 1st, USAID officially stopped to implement their foreign assistance. Clearly, the sector of agriculture has experienced one of the highest cuts in absolute terms, and a reduction that amounts to 81%. The country that are facing the highest levels of concern for acute food insecurity has highlighted by the Global Report on Food Crises, but also by the Hunger Hotspots report, including Sudan, Palestine, South Sudan, Haiti, and Mali, showed that they will face significant funding cuts from both humanitarian and development perspectives. We have an idea of what the amounts will be likely to be, but it is still very uncertain for those numbers to be shared. Overall, declining international support carries serious consequences for global food security, consequences that none of us can afford to ignore. On this note, I would like to thank the Global Network Against Food Crises, which through FSIN makes it possible to gather and analyze information on food insecurity, information without which we wouldn't be able to take important decisions when it comes to humanitarian assistance, but also planning for development support. I would also like to thank the Joint Research Center of the European Union for their constant monitoring of the impact of funding gaps. At the same time, it remains extremely challenging for us to develop a clear picture of the impact of these budget cuts, as the international landscape is subject to sudden and frequent mutation that make this task extremely challenging to execute. As we finalize a study, this soon becomes outdated, and this is why our attention never shifts away from this topic, as the focus is extremely high on this subject on the side of the EU. What we know for certain at this moment is that the amount of total ODA by EU institutions remained constant compared to 2023. We also have the good news that some of the member states of the European Union increased their ODA spending, and this includes Spain, Denmark, and Ireland. As a leading donor of both development and humanitarian assistance, the EU has long been at the forefront of efforts to promote sustainable development and respond to emergencies around the world. We have been and we will continue to be a reliable and responsible partner. Together with our member states, the EU provides 42% of global development aid and 28% of humanitarian assistance. And through our Global Gateway strategy, we aim to mobilize up to 300 billion euros by 2027 in sustainable development investments. But we also need to be clear that the EU cannot fill the gap left by others, and this we've mentioned on several occasions. But to be honest, I don't think that any single actor can meet the scale of this challenge alone. Indeed, when we talk about decreasing international funding, we don't only talk about a decreased financial availability. We're talking about mistrust, in the multilateral system. We're talking about increasingly inward-looking policies. We're talking about weaponization of food, fragmentation, and this leads us to the conviction that we need to modernize our multilateral system. The EU is the strongest supporter of a rule-based global order with the United Nations at its core, but this is also the time to accelerate the reform, a structural reform of the multilateral aid architecture to ensure that it remains fit for purpose in a changing environment. We cannot afford further fragmentation and dispersion of efforts. So in this sense, I wanted to welcome the recent effort made by Ireland to join the Global Network Against Food Crises, our common platform to share intelligence and counter global food insecurity. But the impact of budget cuts can only be reduced if we have the courage to join forces and build on our respecting added values and our comparative advantage. So let me end with the clear message. The need for collective action is greater than ever, and everyone in the international community must shoulder their responsibility. So thank you for now. I close it here, but of course I'm open for questions later on.
Thank you so much to Simona Bortolotti. Those were really sobering realities that you're sharing about the funding landscape. I agree with you fully on the importance of monitoring the impact of these budget cuts, even as the world is constantly changing, and we know that this exercise is really fraught. I'd like to quickly remind the audience to please continue to share questions in the chat or through any of our social media platforms. Next, I'd like to introduce Kalle Hirvonen. Kalle is a research fellow at UNU-WIDER and also a senior research fellow at IFPRI. Kalle, I know you're going to be presenting some slides, and I know you've recently written a lot about the implications of the cuts in foreign aid by many donors. So I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about how these cuts are affecting climate resilience and how that is really undermining food security. Over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Katrina. Just waiting for the slides to appear. Perfect. I think we can move already to the next slide, please. Yeah, so as we've been discussing over the last couple of years, particularly in the last year, several major donor countries have made quite drastic cuts to foreign aid. Another theme here is that the remaining funds are increasingly redirected to short-term emergency relief, which seems like a acute priority. But this is worrying trends for efforts that try to build climate resilience and take proactive action against crisis. It undermines the efforts to build resilience before the crisis hits. It crowds out innovation that helps households to manage risk and prevent them or help them not to take costly coping strategies such as cutting consumption or compromising nutrition or selling productive assets. It also leaves some of the world's most shock-prone areas, and I think of the Horn of Africa and the Sahel, particularly in this context, quite vulnerable over time, where there's a pressing need for kind of innovation and interventions to build resilience. Next slide, please. There's been a lot of innovation in this arena over the last decade or so. When we look at safety nets, and these are programs that provide regular cash or food transfers to vulnerable households, our reviews show that when these transfers are sufficiently large, predictable, and consistent, they are effective in protecting households against these shocks and also building resilience before these crises and shocks hit. Evidence from Kenya shows that micro or index insurance schemes can reduce harmful coping. Again, households cut food consumption or sell productive assets such as livestock because of droughts. But these types of interventions have been shown to be ineffective particularly in the pastoralist contexts. In Mozambique and Tanzania, researchers have looked at the impact of bundling innovation to protect households against droughts, and this evidence in these two countries suggests that combining drought-tolerant seeds and index insurance seems to be quite effective in this regard. So when there was a moderate drought, the drought-tolerant seeds protected yields, crop yields, and when there was an extreme drought, the index insurance kicked in and protected households. Moving on to Nicaragua, we see there's evidence comparing cash and cash plus programs during droughts. And cash plus programs are programs that usually combine livelihood-related interventions, trainings, or large asset transfers, or savings group mobilization on top of regular cash transfer schemes. And here, households that received vocational training or investments grants were able to diversify their incomes to sectors that were less vulnerable to droughts, and they performed better during droughts than households that received cash alone. We see similar evidence from Ethiopia. Next slide, please. We've been studying the PSNP program, the Productive Safety Net program in Ethiopia for a long time at IFPRI. And recently we concluded a study where we compared households that received the PSNP, so food and cash transfers, against other PSNP households that received complementary livelihood interventions, such as savings group mobilization. Some households received assets or cash transfers and livelihood trainings. And here on these graphs, we look at the impacts of shocks to control households. These are PSNP households that received no complementary interventions, whereas the SPEAR households are PSNP households that received these livelihood packages. And we see that when a drought hits, and these are fairly moderate droughts during the study period, food insecurity increases about 36% in PSNP households, whereas in PSNP households that received additional livelihood-related interventions, the impacts on food insecurity are much less. Similar story emerges when we look at livestock holdings, quite large reductions in livestock holdings in control households when a drought hits, whereas in SPEAR households, the impacts are much less when a drought affects these households. So overall, I worry that the innovation and the programming in this climate resilience arena comes to halt because of these funding cuts and this realignment of the remaining funds to emergency support. And I am there. I'm looking forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Tremendous thanks to Kalle Hirvonen for those remarks. It's helpful to see that there's quite a wide variety of proactive investments that have been proven effective at providing protection against climate extremes and shocks. I'd now like to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Nigist Abebe, who is currently the head of vulnerability analysis and mapping at the World Food Programme Sudan, but until recently was also head of the World Food Programme's program in Sudan. This is a country, as this group very well knows, it's facing one of the worst food crises. Nigist, I would like to invite you to share your insights on some of the challenges to humanitarian assistance and acting early that's confronting Sudan as the country faces a worsening food crisis. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Katrina. I am going to be talking about almost the same things that Simona and Sara talked about earlier, but at the country level in Sudan. So in Sudan, we face several challenges, both for the humanitarian program and also for the resilience program. The biggest one, obviously, being the ongoing conflict and insecurity. As you know, there is active conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces. But in addition, there are also non-state armed groups and tribal militias, particularly in North Darfur and Kordofans, most recently, which creates fluid front lines and unpredictable violence in these parts of the country. There are drone strikes that threaten various areas, including more recently Port Sudan, where WFP Sudan's office is located. The country offices has now moved to Port Sudan after Khartoum was attacked almost more than 2 years ago. These kinds of attacks endanger the humanitarian presence. There is destruction of infrastructure and disruption of essential services, including telephone, internet, banking, and looting of humanitarian commodities. Plus, there are unexploded ordinances making humanitarian assistance and also movement of commercial commodities extremely difficult. In addition, in WFP, as you may know, lost 6 staff since the start of this conflict. They were killed mainly during the conflict. And there have been artillery shellings of WFP facilities, in addition to the killing of the staff, more recently in El Fasher town of North Darfur. There was also a recent attack on humanitarian convoy, WFP and UNICEF convoy near El Fasher on June 2 that resulted in 5 deaths of the contracted drivers. There were several injuries and destruction of the trucks, and also some of the aid supplies. This conflict has resulted in extremely high need, starting with severe food insecurity and famine that was discussed by Sara, but I'll go into a bit of detail for Sudan. So now the conflict is entering its 3rd year. It has resulted in one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. In the December 2024 IPC analysis projected that up to more than half of the population of Sudan is facing IPC 3 or above food security outcomes, including 8.1 million in IPC phase 4 and at least 638,000 in IPC phase 5 famine, which is the worst outcome. The Famine Review Committee then identified famine condition in camps in El Fasher and the Western Nuba Mountains, with projections including expansion to 5 additional areas by May 2025. We have already passed that, so the expectation is that some of these areas are facing famine. And the risk of famine was also detected in 17 areas in the Central Nuba Mountains, South, East, and North Darfur, Al Jazeera, and Khartoum states. High food prices, inflation, disrupted markets, low agricultural production were the main reasons for this high level of food insecurity. For example, the price of sorghum is more than double in May compared to last year. It's like 100% more than last year. We stopped comparing prices to historical average because the prices are simply not comparable. There are, in addition, Sara mentioned large IDPs throughout the world, especially the conflict-affected areas. In Sudan has the worst displacement crisis in the world, with more than 10 million people internally displaced. There has been some improvement in parts of Sudan, including some improvement in the level of security. So about 1 million people have already returned to Al Jazeera, Sennar, and Khartoum states. But in addition to the ones that have been displaced internally, over 4 million people have moved across the country into neighboring countries. So this has made the Sudan crisis a regional crisis, not just a crisis for Sudan. Looking at education, while with the recent improvement in security, some schools have, in 6 states, some schools have partially opened. more than 17 million of the 19 million school-age children are out of school in Sudan. Because of this, school feeding programs were also disrupted, but in some areas, take-off rations are being implemented. When we talk about malnutrition, 3.7 million children and pregnant and lactating breastfeeding, women are wasted. There is very limited coverage of nutrition program due to funding and access issues. And overall, the access to health services has been severely limited in conflict-affected areas in particular, due to the damaged infrastructure and the departure of healthcare workers from affected areas to safer parts of the country. But the large level of displacement has also meant that even in the safer parts of the country, because of the displacement and the overcrowding, the available services, including healthcare services, are not sufficient to meet the needs of the population. Even in the baseline, many of the services in Sudan were not great, but now there has been extreme overcrowding because of the displacement to these areas. There is overall economic crisis in the country. There is hyperinflation, there is significant currency depreciation, and also severe liquidity shortages across the country. The cost of agricultural inputs, including fuel, fertilizer, and machinery, is extremely high, and there is also very limited availability. In conflict-affected areas in particular, the markets have collapsed, making it extremely difficult for communities to access food and other non-food essentials. There's also severe disruption of the supply route, making movement very difficult from the relatively safer parts of the country to the insecure parts of the country, but also importing from abroad, plus cross-border trade and movement of commodities with neighboring countries. In addition to the issues that are affecting the countries because of the conflict, there has also been natural disasters that contributed to the problem. Last year, parts of Sudan faced the worst flooding in 40 years. This has damaged the rainfall, so the level of displacement, the damage to infrastructure has been the worst because the level of flooding was the worst in 40 years in parts of Sudan. This has damaged crops, infrastructure, made it extremely difficult to move commodities, both for commercial and also for WFP and other humanitarian assistance to different parts of the country. This year, similar levels of flooding are expected because the rains are projected to be normal to above normal. Compared to last year, we were told the rains are expected to be even higher. So we expect similar levels of flooding in different parts of the country. This has also resulted in increased disease outbreak, including cholera, in the densely populated areas. But we also expect other diseases such as dengue fever and malaria to increase as the rainy season progresses. And with the very low availability of the health services, it is going to be to contribute to all of the problems I mentioned earlier. Another big challenge, especially for WFP and humanitarian actors, is humanitarian access constraint. In addition to the infrastructure and other issues I mentioned earlier, the insecurity, the bureaucratic bottlenecks, and movement restrictions affect the aid delivery. There is fragmented and politicized coordination within national and local authorities, leading to inconsistent procedures and delayed or denied permits. It's difficult to collect data, it's difficult to move commodities or to access some of WFPs or other warehouses.
Great.
There are various fees and taxes that are imposed by both the de facto and official authorities, and also difficulty to access escort services. There is harassment at checkpoints by various actors, both official and armed groups. So moving commodities is extremely difficult in Sudan. So in addition to the issues related to the challenges related to humanitarian access, there is fuel shortage, inflated cost, limited convoy movement, limiting the convoy movement and air operation. In the conflict-affected areas in particular, there is outage of telecommunication and internet, and also infrastructure damage. This makes data collection, communication, and operation in general extremely difficult and challenging.
Nigist, sorry, we will have to move on to the next segment, but I must say thank you so much for these perspectives from the ground, for which I am deeply grateful. Hearing the challenges on the ground is absolutely necessary for us to understand how to improve our research and direct it better at some of these problems. And hearing about massive market disruptions, displacement of 10 million people, fuel shortages, disease, the worst flooding in 40 years is very, very sobering. The risks of attacks on provision of humanitarian aid themselves are also core problems. And I appreciate you sharing your insights here, and I'm sure they will have more opportunities to talk about them during the Q&A portion, but thank you, Nigist.
Thank you.
I'd like to remind the audience to please raise questions in the comments in the chat box. Feel free to direct them at a particular speaker, or just to broadly pose a question that you'd like us to find someone to answer that question. I'd next like to introduce Luca Russo, who is currently an independent consultant and co-lead of an exciting study on trends in drivers of acute food insecurity that was commissioned by the Global Network Against Food Crises. Previously, Luca was with the FAO and was one of the initiators of the Global Report on Food Crises. So Luca, welcome to you. We know that measuring and monitoring acute food insecurity is extremely difficult in fragile and conflict-ridden context, if only because of severe constraints on our ability to collect data. I'm wondering if you could tell us what conclusions is the study for the Global Network Against Food Crises arriving at, and what are we learning from the recent trends, and how could those lessons help better inform early warning and early action mechanisms? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katrina. I must admit that I feel a bit embarrassed to speak just after Nigist, because Nigist was so clear in describing in such clear manner the human suffering that has happened in Sudan now, are coming back to global numbers. You know, you feel some disconnect between what I'm going to say and what Nigist just said. The first thing I would like to say is that when we talk of acute food insecurity numbers, we have to realize that we are only talking of an approximation of the reality. The reality in conflict-affected countries is so complex that the number that we hear, that we have heard from Sara and from others, are just the best possible approximation of the situation. Now, the policy question today, we have all heard that acute food insecurity has increased over the last 10 years substantially. But it's around this increase, there have been a number of contradictory policy message communication, and therefore a lot of decision makers are somehow at a loss in understanding how severe has been this degradation and what has really implied. So what we try to do with this study is to say, let's do a better approximation of the situation in terms of trends and the evolution of acute food insecurity. There are a number of challenges that as a researcher we face in trying to get this better approximation of trend. So just to quote a few, the first one is different metrics. Data at country level are collected with different methodology, which are not always fully comparable. In our study, we opted to use the IPC CAD harmonisé, that is considered the global standard in terms of acute food insecurity, recognizing that there are also other data, as I said, that are also important. And then another very important point is the always changing geographical coverage. Each year, you have different countries which are facing food crisis. You don't have data for all the countries. Sara showed that the coverage is 80%, 70%. So this thing, when you come to trends analysis, makes things very complicated. A third element, which I think is very important, is the overall volatility of acute food insecurity. Acute food insecurity changes during the year. So it's always difficult to say, okay, how many people are acute food insecure during the year? The choice of the global report to use peak most probably is the right choice. And then the last one is the overall coverage of let's say, of our sampling study. The global report on food crisis has covered in the last over 10 years about 70 countries. But each year, the number of countries has varied because some countries there were no data or they were not in crisis and so on. So what we try to do is to find a sample that could be comparable across the 10 years of our study. And we found that for 53 countries, this was possible. And these 53 countries cover about 80 to 90% of the total coverage of the global report, therefore gives a good sense of the situation. There are a number of biases, and this is what we have been trying to address in our study. These biases are essentially already mentioned methodological bias, but also terms of geographical coverage, but also terms on missing area, shifting population. So all this to this a methodology to correct bias to get a better approximation of the situation. So the report is going to be published in the next few days of few weeks, and he presents these adjusted trends, and we have also tried to do some modeling to get still a better sense of the situation. Now, what are the results of this study? Okay, I would say that the breaking news of this study is that there is no breaking news, in the sense that what Sara presented in her presentation and in the global report on food crisis in terms of trends is very consistent also with what we have found in terms of trends and adjusted trends. There are a little bit of difference between, particularly when you have a total, and then if you go by country or by region, you may find some difference in terms of adjusted vis-a-vis of the global report. But basically, the number, sorry about that. The number are right. Maybe one difference, which I think is important, is that the accuracy of the global report has tended to improve over the years. So according to our estimate, in the period 2016-2020, maybe because of coverage issues, sampling issues, there was an underestimation of the prevalence by the global report on food crisis. So that means, as a result of this, that most probably the direction of the slope, which shows the increase of acute food insecurity, is a bit less pronounced than what is in the global report on food crisis, because there was an underestimation in the period 2016 to 2020. So, but basically, the results are correct, and what we are proposing is a system to try to adjust a little bit some of these bias that exist in acute food insecurity countries. You were asking me about early warning. Maybe one thing I wanted to say is that one of the consequences of the 8 cut is that there is much less resources invested in data collection. We have what I would call a data drought. There is less and less data available. FuseNet was disconnected for some time. Now they are back on work, which this is very positive. But there is a lot of what were the formal surveys that they were undertaking in the past are being dropped. Also, the World Bank and others are moving away from traditional data collection. So there is a lot of attention on modeling, maybe even too much attention on modeling, because one paper that I saw as also a member of the Famine Review Committee is that at the moment there are 59 attempts to model famine, and this is in a way you see that this complicates the situation. Now, one fundamental thing, and that is my last remark, one fundamental thing for predicting food security is to know the past and understand the history of the evolution of food security. So with our study, which help us to understand what has happened in the last 10 years, I think this is a very good basis to predict what is going to happen in the next few years by using maybe in this case some modeling approach using and making some correlation between the different drivers and the trends that are published in this report. I will stop here. Thank you very much.
My thanks to Luca Russo for those really important comments. I guess there's a positive piece on the accuracy improving over time, but of course that definitely contextualizes past numbers. I wanted to press ahead quickly to welcome my colleague from IFPRI, Yanyan Liu, who is a senior research fellow at IFPRI, to deliver our final set of remarks. Yanyan, I know that you and colleagues at IFPRI, I've been reading your work. You have a predictive model to help anticipate food crises. You're using really exciting AI techniques, and I know dozens upon dozens of data sources. I wonder if you could tell us how AI can help address the kind of data challenges that we've heard about throughout the seminar today, and how certain we can be that such approaches can inform meaningfully early warning and early action systems in a timely manner. And maybe you can more broadly touch on whether we can put our trust in artificial intelligence in this space. Thank you so much. Over to you. We can see your slides. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for having me. Okay, let me start. I'm presenting our work on predictive modeling of food crises using real-time risk indicators. It's a joint work with Rob, my colleagues Rob, and also some colleagues in UNICEF and the University of Maryland. Our objective is to predict food crises as identified by IPC measures of acute food insecurity using passively collected big data. As we know, IPC is considered the gold standard for assessing IFPRI, and it's widely used for humanitarian and development organizations. And the data, however, data collection for IPC is costly and often difficult, as explained by several speakers earlier, particularly in fragile and conflict-affected settings. Recent advances in remote sensing have enabled access to large passively collected datasets that correlate with acute food insecurity risk factors. These developments make it possible to monitor risk factors in real time and predict food crises timely and at low cost, and in hard-to-reach conflict zones. About our data, our neonatal analysis is the area months where IPC data is reported. Our sample includes 56,000 observations across about 1,200 areas at mean 1 and mean 2 level in 29 countries from 2017 to 2022. We use two key outcome variables. The first one is IPC phase, ranging from 1 to 5, with 1 being minimal and 5 being catastrophe or famine. And another variable is a continuous variable percentage of population classified as food crisis, phase 3 and above, which suggests the need of urgent action. So this figure shows the distribution of overall of our data on overall phases. Most of our observations are in phase 3, which is followed by phase 2 and phase 4. we have compiled 172 predictor variables. We roughly group them into 6 categories: weather conditions such as rainfall, temperature, etc., and also second is geographic variables, elevation, ruggedness, and then conflict, agriculture and land productivity, such as EVI, and also food prices, from World WIP and FAO, and other economic conditions. Our forecasting model uses machine learning method. It's a gradient boosting algorithm. We use 2022 IPC data as the testing site, and use the previous round 2017 to 2021 data to do as training site. Our forecast horizon is 12 months. Let's look at the performance of our model. When we use the percentage of population in food crisis as a dependent variable, our out of sample R square is 0.25, which is reasonably high because it's for a continuous variable. Our model can correctly identify the 94% of the food crisis cases, and the precision is also pretty good. And in our prediction, 78% of the cases predicted to have food crisis indeed experienced it 12 months later. So this is suggested that if this measure is critical for efficiency in resource allocation, if our model is followed by the development organizations to allocate fundings. Overall, our model can correctly predict IPC phases among 65 of the cases in the 12 months in advance. We also did the feature analysis, and our top predictors of food insecurity include food prices, volatility, and spatial dispersion, which is followed by infrastructure gaps, poor economic growth, and weather conditions. Conflict is also very important. Our sensitivity analysis suggests that a 10% increase in conflict intensity would imply that 31% of the stresses cases are pushed into crisis or worse, IPC 3 and above. So I'll skip this one. So in terms of policy implication, our key question is, can this predictive model be operationalized for food crisis monitoring? Our findings suggest that forecasting food crisis using real-time risk factor monitoring is feasible. This approach can reduce costs by decreasing the frequency of IPC assessment. It can also support timely prediction of IPC in conflict-affected and fragile settings. Overall, we believe our predictive model offers a promising tool to support early warning and early action mechanisms for addressing the food crisis. So in the future, our future research goes to 3 directions. First, we try to improve model performance and coverage by incorporating more granular IPC consistent FieldNet data. And second of all, we try to develop predictive models for other food insecurity outcomes from in-country and regional data sources, such as Kenya's early warning system data and Myanmar's household welfare survey data. Also, we want to go beyond prediction to understand causality, because that's important for designing effective interventions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those compelling remarks, Yanyan, and it's a truly fascinating model that can hopefully help address food crises. I would love to invite all of our speakers to turn on their cameras again, and we are going to enter the Q&A portion of this segment. I will remind audience members that they can continue to submit questions in the chat as we start to engage some of our speakers here. but liking to come in on a first question we received. Rogers Otuta from Oxfam, South Sudan, has raised a really important question about sort of the predictability of many crises. And he pointed out that there's this correlation over time about which countries are contributing to global food insecurity. We know that there's a constellation of interconnected drivers that are often very geographically concentrated and don't change vastly over time that contribute to problems. These include market volatility and poverty and weak governance and the like, as well as vulnerability to extremes of weather. So his question was, how can we leverage these observed trends, these predictable portions, to enhance national readiness and buffer against future shocks? So I wanted to, if anyone wants to come in on any question, feel free to use the hand raise feature here. But I thought to call particularly first on Sara McHattie, if she would like to come in, because I think this question of sort of what are the trends, what are they showing, and what is the implication of sort of seeing those? I'm thinking of your figure where you showed some of the same countries lighting up with some of the same issues over time. Are there any things that can be done to sort of enhance the national readiness there? And then second, I thought to call on Kalle Hirvonen, whose work is looking at some of the policies and programming that might effectively sort of guard against. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about how early warning and early action might help buffer against future shocks here, but just really thinking of how to enhance national readiness in general. Over to you if you'd like to come in now, Sara, or you can pass to Kalle if you want him to go first.
I can jump in now. Thanks, Katrina. Just to take a first stab, if that's okay, Kalle. One of the slides I didn't show is that we've done an analysis as well of how countries move in and out of food crisis. And one thing that we've definitely seen is that once a country is in food crisis, it generally doesn't come out again. So once you've been knocked down by a shock, it's very difficult to come up. And I think that one of the reasons for this is just the erosion of coping strategies. And really that happens at the national level. We saw that with COVID, for example, as governments were struggling to generate funds to import food, and at the same time that removes funds from social protection. So we know that erosion happens at those three different levels, which makes it more difficult to come out. But also we know that the international community tends to react late. We hear often that we wait for phase 5 before we react to a crisis. And yet we know, and by definition, IPC phase 3 is that people's coping strategies are starting to erode and they're compromising their futures to cover their food needs. So there's got to be, and we know where crises happen. Generally, I've been working in this business, alas, for 25 years, and I think it's very rare to see a situation deteriorate so quickly. Obviously, we have a few examples in the last few years where the situation got terrible very fast in Gaza Strip and also in the Sudan. But I think in building up national capacities, in some ways, we've really had a big shock to the system this year with funding going down. And I think that this also allows us to sort of see necessity is the mother of intervention and of invention. And maybe we are going to focus a little bit more on building those government capacities because we as the international community perhaps have fewer capacities. And maybe we can also find other solutions, such as correcting some of the other imbalances in the system. I saw a statistic recently that between 2015 and 2024, the budgeted debt service in Nigeria was 2 times the health and education spending for the country. Is there a way that we could help the country to build up its own capacity for these social services that aren't necessarily linked to international funding, but just linked to supporting them to really face those real challenges that they have? I hope that was helpful. Thanks.
Fantastic. Very, very great reflection, Sara. Kalle, over to you.
Great, thanks. This is a great question, and I really like Sara's inputs there. So I think the question was really about this predictable trends. When we look at these models, there are certain factors that are often predicting crisis, and some of them are kind of time invariant. So, for example, we know that in many of these crises happen in areas that have high levels of climate vulnerability. There are often droughts, again, highlighting the Horn of Africa, where I've been doing quite some work recently, and also the Sahel. So in areas like these, having robust safety net programs, possibly with the shock responsive aspects that kind of scale up during crisis and then go back when the crisis is over. But also like thinking a little bit outside of the box, investments to, for example, to road infrastructure might help, improve market integration, which is super important during droughts, for example, to keep food prices in check, so that the areas that have surplus production can kind of export to these areas that are experiencing droughts. And so where these investments come from, they can come from national governments, but also from foreign aid that is now obviously in a bit of a crisis mode. Thank you.
Very helpful reflections. I wanted to ask if anyone else wants to come in. And I also wanted to say we're getting more and more questions in this vein. So if anyone would like to raise their hand to come in, we're hearing also what homegrown options for addressing food security look most appealing to you from M. Ola BC. And broadly, how can foreign aid dependence be reduced and governance and local ability to mobilize resources be increased to more effectively address crises? Wondering if anyone has insights and wants to come in on sort of the funding piece and reduction of aid dependence or any other aspect here. Luca, over to you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I want also to link to the previous question about building capacity and so on. You know, one of the salient features of the most severe crisis, particularly the crisis where there is a risk of famine, is also sometimes the government is part of the problem, but sometimes it's also unable to provide solution. And in this case, also in terms of thinking out of the box, there are a number of movement, grassroots level movement, for instance, in Sudan, that organized by the diaspora and so on, that they are extremely effective in addressing the war situation, for instance, in Darfur. And our impression, because I've been reviewing some of the situations there, is that this initiative tends somehow to be bypassed, because it's local, it's not UN, it's not international NGOs, but actually they're the most effective in addressing some of the problems, also because they have access where, for instance, the UN don't have access, and this is typical of Sudan. So the idea of not reducing external assistance, but refocusing external assistance and building the capacity of actors that can really contribute to address acute food insecurity, that could be a still somehow unexplored way to deal with this major crisis.
I think that's really powerful of talking about grassroots movements, civil society, and sort of addressing crises more at the local level. I know my own research in Mali with interviewing local leaders there has seen the value for last mile service delivery challenges of local aid distribution committees and leveraging the knowledge of local communities about who is most effective and what are the best ways to target. So that very much resonates. Simona, welcome you to come on and share on these questions.
Yes, sorry, just to add a few thoughts to what colleagues have already shared. It's clear that there is no silver bullet solution for everything. It's very much context-based, but what we try to do on a daily basis is to ensure coordination. For instance, as in DG INPA, which is usually focusing on medium to longer term solutions, we always make sure that whenever we draft any action, we do so in coordination with the humanitarian agencies, the ones that focus more on short-term assistance. So I just wanted to stress the importance of the nexus approach when intervening. We have different examples of that. It's in our core mandate to have an agenda that maintains a very strong focus on fragility, even if of course we then tend to invest in longer term activities. Just to maybe give examples of our EU response to the war in Ukraine, to ensure that partner countries were not damaged by the lack of exports of key agricultural outputs from Ukraine. We established different programs that, yes, had a very short-term focus to ensure that immediate needs were met, but we also had a big package for 17 countries all over the world, and as well as regional programs to make sure that local production was also enhanced. And when we do so, we work very closely with national authorities. Like I can mention the case of Chad, but also Kenya, where in 2022, we worked together with the government of Kenya, for instance, to establish the National Drought Management Authority, which at the beginning was functioning with a strong EU support, but slowly it became an essential tool to which the government itself decided to invest. And as of today, the National Drought Authority of Kenya is fully operational and is capable of anticipating periods of drought and responding to this with proper measures. It's not easy at all, and it's not always extremely, let's say, successful, but it's the only way we can really ensure an impact, coordination and dialogue, and yes, just making sure we all contribute with our own added value. Thanks.
Thanks for that interjection, Simona, and I always appreciate a push for using a nexus approach. We next have a set of questions that are really related to data, and I wonder if this might be a place for Yanyan and Luca and potentially others to come in. The question that is coming up here is, how can we improve the quality, reliability, and use of food security data, especially price and IPC data? They have some problems in gathering them. Maybe they're not always perfectly suited to triggering early warning systems. So how can we improve their quality, reliability, and use in order to strengthen early warning systems and ensure timely and coordinated action in response, as well as following shocks and crises? Would you like to come in first, Yanyan?
Yes, about IPC data, I think it's Luca has mentioned some limitation of it. As to the price data, in our case, in my study, we noticed that monitoring food prices is very important for forecasting food insecurity. So it's the single most important factors in our model, shows that and it's the most important useful information is price volatility over time, and also the spatial dispersion. Those two measures are from the WFP data. It's aggregate at the country level. We also have market level data from FAO. However, those data are less harmonized, so we could use it to monitor a single market, because it's the commodity is different. They give commodity and market level data over time. It's very, so how to use it, but it's less useful when we look at different markets, to look at comparing across countries, across different markets at the same time. So how to make this data more useful, I think it will be important to do for next step. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks for those reflections. Luca, over to you.
Well, you know, I mentioned the issues of data drought when I was talking, in the sense that The reality today is that we'll have to do with less and less data than in the past, particularly the data that were used to analyze, which are essentially from formal survey. So there is a lot of potentiality in crowdsourcing data, but maybe one interesting thing that I'm happening to work with a few colleagues that work on the Famine Review Committee is the idea of really to understand by reviewing all the crises that has happened in the past, what are those 5, 6 key indicators or drivers that have significantly impacted in worsening acute food insecurity. And this can help also in building and forecasting some trajectories to understand in advance if, let's say, a famine is likely to happen before the famine is actually happening. So, but this most probably will need to have a little bit of effort in making some, let's say, informed decision on what are the indicators that should be given a priority in a given country. The recent joint monitoring report that the World Bank has developed for predicting food crisis is built on 6, 7 indicators, which are then contextualized according to countries. But that could be an interesting perspective to consider in a framework where less and less data are available.
Thank you for that. Sara, I'm going to give you the last word. Please keep it less than a minute because we need to conclude the seminar and turn the floor to Rob. Over to you.
Thank you. I'll try and keep it to below a minute. I just wanted to really jump on that use, because my impression is that often we do have the information, it's just not necessarily being used and reacted to quickly enough. For example, yesterday we found out that there are almost 15,000 people in Yemen in IPCCH phase 5. 2 months ago, we published a projection of almost 1.1 million in IPC phase 4. We knew the situation was going to get worse. So my question would be, how are we actually using the information that we have, and how is it insufficient to be able to act quickly? Thanks.
Thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you so much to our audience. We really appreciate your participation. I now turn the floor back to Rob Voss to conclude the seminar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sara. I hope you can hear me. I've had some connectivity issue.
We are not hearing you at the moment, Rob. I think we may have lost Rob Voss here. Giving it 1 minute for him to collect, otherwise I will help conclude this. Right. Well, I will jump in here since we are not able to connect with Rob Voss, to just say I have greatly appreciated these reflections, this sharing of deep modeling and research, and really drawing our attention to the challenges, the patterns and we're seeing, and also just to reflect on the global landscape in terms of finance and capacity to address some of the crises that we've heard about. I think it's fair to say that in light of these trends, this work is needed more than ever, despite any challenges in being able to fund and finance and carry it forward. I'm also hearing very much the need for local dependence on local contexts in order to have homegrown solutions as well. Rob, is your sound okay now? Welcome you to come in to conclude this seminar.
Yeah, but maybe it's best if you continue summarizing because my connection is really very poor.
It's very strong now if you would like to say a few words, Rob.
All right. Let's try and get back to what I was going to say. So apologies again. I hope this now works. As I was starting to say, thanks everybody for their contributions. We've seen worsening food insecurity trends with globally starkly increasing numbers, people facing food crisis and in need of food assistance. We know what the main drivers are: conflict, climate shocks, and economic shocks, but often they come together as a complex, perfect storm, as Swinnen emphasized, making responses to both attenuating the severity of crisis and addressing their root causes extremely difficult. In this context, waning international support is becoming an added compounding factor. As we also heard, increasing shares of existing support are mainly focused on relief and less resources for resilience building. Even though we do know quite a bit what types of proactive investments could help provide simultaneously relief to shocks that impede food crisis for vulnerable people and help build more resilient livelihoods for rural populations. That said, we also heard from practical problems on the ground that impede existing support to reach the population in need. In the case of Sudan, and in this context, reaching people in need in Sudan is further hampered by mass displacement of people, making it a regional crisis. This calls for concerted international efforts to try and take away those impediments, which, this is the bigger challenge, will require putting an end to conflict. In this regard, there was also some good news from the European Union and the Global Network Against Food Crisis, which first is trying to keep up levels of support from their end, as well as to strengthen the concerted solutions through the Global Network Against Food Crisis. This will be important countervailing power to the overall global trend of waning support. It may not be enough, however, to offset the current nation's trend of budget cuts, so we should try and nurture and leverage these green shoots amidst an expanding desert. Also, questions were raised about how to reduce the dependence on aid of countries facing food crisis. In this regard, it will be important to invest more in national capacity building and the national response capacity. Again, it will be challenging given the constraints I already mentioned. Lastly, we also heard about limitations to adequately monitoring food crisis conditions and the threat of diminishing funding for sustained data collection and early warning, early action mechanisms. Improving data is therefore essential for guiding better responses and better action. In this regard, we've heard some comforting news that validate the observed trends as were presented in the global report, and also about the potential of using artificial intelligence methods to better anticipate food crisis by predicting the crisis based on the crisis risk factors and the main drivers to monitor at relatively low cost the factors in real time. However, this work still has a long way to go, but it may help overcome some of the data gaps, especially in fragile contexts where on-the-ground data collection is difficult very often. So there's many sobering news and trends that we've seen and heard of in this seminar, but also some green lights or green shoots, as I mentioned them, that hopefully we can work on also in the IFPRI and CGIAR research program on food frontiers and security. So with that, I think we can close the seminar. Let me thank particularly also Katrina for excellent moderation and all the support staff that have made this event possible, and to all of you for your attention during the seminar. And hopefully we can continue this conversation moving forward. So with that, thank you all very much. And with this, we close the seminar.